Before anyone points it out, I am well aware that every year my Inside Number 9 videos always start the same. I say that going in I wasn't expecting it to still have so much boundless creativity in it. Yeah, it's 6 episodes of dark comedy anthology by Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton. Yeah, know what I'm getting. This was particularly noticeable this year because it's very hard to imagine anything being nearly as good as Wise Owl. You'd think I would have learned by now that my usual skepticism when a show's been running for as long as this isn't warranted in this specific case. But it's kind of a good thing that I'm never expecting Inside Number 9 to still be as good as it is, so I can get my usual dopamine hit whenever an episode reaches a point where I go, ooh, I didn't see that coming. Wow, why did I ever doubt this show? I'm never going to stop marvelling at the fact Inside Number 9 exists and is still just as good as it always was 8 seasons later, which is a feat that's only ever been achieved by a handful of shows before. If you Google shows that stayed good from beginning to end, they're almost always short shows with about 4 seasons in them max, 5 if they were lucky. The only show I can think of that managed at least 8 good seasons is The Simpsons. Granted, the amount of episodes Inside Number 9 has had amounts to about 3 years worth of Golden Age Simpsons, but the idea that Inside Number 9 has achieved something that's only been matched by one of the most successful television shows ever means that I should probably stop doubting it and questioning whether it's going to bowl me over again like it did last time and just enjoy the last 2 seasons I have with it. Anyway, first up, if you cast your mind back to Christmas, the first episode was aired separately as a Christmas special and was called The Bones of St. Nicholas. The last Christmas special they did was one of the format gimmick ones, so I understand the desire to do a more straightforward Christmas ghost story this time. Well, it's not quite a straightforward ghost story, but it has the appearance of one. So Dr. Jasper Parkway is camping out in a supposedly haunted church on Christmas Eve, when he's interrupted by an incredibly annoying couple who barge in on him searching for the fabled jawbone of St. Nicholas, the man known as the original Santa Claus. Aside from its inventive quirks, it's got all the facets of a traditional Christmas ghost story. Britain has a long history of using the most wonderful time of the year to explore characters with tragic backstories, and using the supernatural to prod them into revealing their true natures and healing from past traumas. This one's also a great example of the common belief that comedy and horror are twins. Pierce and Posey are comedy characters who use their annoying, non-threatening conversational style on a meta level to throw the viewer off from understanding what's actually going on with them, but also on an in-universe level to build up the characters' own defences against succumbing to their own loss and pain. The theme of supernatural premonitions is deftly woven into the characters' stories, and it makes for a wonderful addition to the genre of depressing British Christmas ghost stories. Because even when you're surrounded by your loved ones and happiness, you need someone to burst in on that and remind you that the world is shit and sometimes children die. Oh, and Merry Christmas. Several months later the series started properly with Mother's Ruin, the most League of Gentlemen reminiscent episode of the series, and the first time I've seen Reece and Steve do a full-on torture porn. So 2 brothers break into their mother's old home, now owned by a ruthless gangster and his wife, so that they can conduct a séance to find out where their mother's fortune is hidden. Unfortunately, the gangster and his wife, that own the house now, show up and don't take too kindly to this. Usually when Reece and Steve pair up, they flip between Reece being annoying and Steve being serious, or Steve being meek and silly and naive, and Reece being stern and the sort of person you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of. And this time the archetypes are that way round. Which works perfectly here when they're at the mercy of Reggie, which takes up most of the runtime. Because that means you got Steve's character squeaking in terror at these 2 horrible characters, which is just adorable to watch. Phil Daniels and Anita Dobson are great too as Reggie and Francis. Reggie's this London dungeon stereotype of a sadistic bastard cackling in your face as he threatens violence. It's a nice bit of grimy and horrible fun, which is only appropriate given the prestigious audience that Inside Number 9's been courting over the last few years with its ingenious high concepts to tickle the intellectual bit of your brain. It's important to remind the viewers that Inside Number 9 isn't meant to be comfortable viewing, it's also got teeth. Episode 3 is called Paryskever-Decker Tryophobia. Yes, I said it, I bet you thought I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm not saying it again. Anyway, this episode is one of those love it or hate it absurdist pieces, though it's much broader and more likeable than say The Last Night of the Proms from a couple of years ago, where I was one of the very few people who liked it. So it's about a guy who's got a phobia of Friday the 13th, and he bunks off work and tries to keep his interactions with people on this ominous day to a minimum to avoid anything bad happening. And he just so happens to keep on running into omens of bad luck. I really like this one. I found it genuinely hilarious because I love contrivance comedy where the character is on the edge of cracking up and their environment starts to confront them, almost as if the world has set out to deliberately try and provoke them. It's something that early Simpsons used to do all the time, and it's one of my favourite styles of comedy. It's especially good here because Reece is so good as awkward characters being pushed to the edge of sanity. And thematically, using someone who believes this strongly in luck and karma works especially well. It effectively turns the universe itself into the antagonist, throwing problem after problem at him. Also, a ladder has now been put up over his stairs for some reason, so he has to walk under it. Of course he does, fucking typical. The steps in the story are completely ridiculous, of course, and only really work with the logical explanation at the end. But because it's so ridiculous, it does a good job in throwing you off. You're never quite sure where it's going at any point. Although I did predict what happened to his wife in the very last scene, I didn't see the reveal about the source of his phobia coming. Spoiler warning, this one's a story of survivor's guilt. Gareth's entire class died in a bus crash when he was a kid, and he survived. And this culminates in this, one of the most inventive and powerful shots in the whole show. I adore this shot, and given the gargantuan amount of hits that Inside Number 9 has notched up over its lifetime, that's really saying something. Next up we had Love is a Stranger. So a news report warns of a killer in the neighbourhood offing singletons that they've dubbed the Lonely Hearts Killer, and we follow a woman going on speed dates over the internet. Obviously this seeding the idea in the viewer's mind that she's going to run into the killer. This one was always going to live or die on the performance of the lonely single woman going on her dates, and Claire Rusbrook gives such a good performance as her that I didn't actually twig that a reversal was going on. I should point out here that I watch Inside Number 9 with my partner, and I did find it interesting that in the previous episode, I predicted the wife was going to get hit by a car at the end, and she didn't. But in this one, she predicted that Vicky was going to turn out to be the murderer, and I didn't. It just goes to show how there's no accounting for anything in this show. The process of Vicky going on these dates and the camera work and score drawing attention to significant lines and moments in these dates where the guy she talks to show slightly off-colour intentions or worldviews do all they can to throw you off. Moments of possible connection get undermined by a character played by Steve just giving her a particular look that says maybe there's a bit more to this one than meets the eye. All except Asim Chowdhury's Jai, who seems like a sweet and misunderstood man with a facial deformity that makes him vulnerable until he actually shows up for their date and reveals who he really is. Like any good murder mystery, it keeps you guessing, and uses as its hook the fact that you never know the true intent of anyone on the internet. Even your humble narrator. Nah, just kidding, I'm the most boring fucker you've ever met in real life. Or am I? Yes, I am. Next up, I knew everyone was waiting for me to get to this one, 3x3, the first episode not to feature Shearsmith and Pemberton on screen at all. This one's very much in the mould of their live special from several years ago, where they make it look like there's technical glitches in the broadcast as a means of throwing you off and shocking you. And this one, while I loved it as ever, didn't work quite as well. I was away when this one aired, but if I had been watching it live, I don't think I would have believed it when they announced that this week's episode, a fake episode about a bus that they were promoting the week beforehand, they even put footage from it in the trailer, was cancelled. And instead the BBC would be broadcasting a new quiz show pilot starring British light entertainment staple Lee Mack called 3x3. You get it? 3x3 equals 9. Ooh. I say I wouldn't have believed it because of my familiarity with the types of stunts this show pulls, but as I watched it, I did feel something wasn't quite right with it. That's part of the trick, obviously. It's meant to catch viewers off guard, and it probably would have worked better a few decades ago when channel surfing was something that people still did. They're flicking through the channels, and when they stop on this show that kinda looks like pointless, they're struck by just how odd it is. The set and the graphics look much more dated than you would have expected of a BBC quiz show in 2023. The actors also feel more like they're delivering lines than off-the-cuff remarks that you get if you were just using ordinary members of the public, and it has this feeling of artificiality to it. Of course, you've got to give the channel surfer reasons to land on this show and stay watching for the gruesome ending, of course, but that does kind of nullify the point of it being a trap. I guess it's just hard to make a trap show like this look natural enough to surprise you and unnatural enough to retain your interest at the same time. This is not to say I didn't totally love it while I was watching it, of course. I love stories told via unconventional means. It's truly inspired to have this story of a girl with psychic abilities being emotionally tormented by her parents is drip-fed to the audience via these little details dropped into awkward, uncomfortable game show banter. And 3x3 did get the headlines it wanted. Apparently some people did fall for it and were shocked at the Scanners-type head explosion at the end. Although, if you click on these articles claiming that people complained to the BBC about apparently airing the death of a contestant, there are no real details anywhere. They just link to tweets from people who were clearly in on the joke. Journalism. The real-world mythology will have been what Reese and Steve wanted out of this more than anything. It seems that people are more interested in the idea of people being offended by art more than there are actual people offended by said art in the first place. The final episode is The Last Weekend. I'm probably alone in this being my least favourite of Season 8, because everyone else seems to love it. Not to say I dislike it, and I see why they did this, but I'm kind of conflicted on how I feel about it. It stars Reese and Steve as a gay couple, Chaz and Joe, who've gone on holiday, only Joe is slowly dying of bowel cancer. The show sometimes does straight-faced drama, and it's made to appear for the bulk of the runtime that this is a simple story of grief. And the subject of the grief obviously is Joe, the one who's dying. The stages of it, denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance, appear on random background objects that thematically link up with the action. I was engaged, but I did spend a lot of it thinking, wait, they wouldn't actually do a tragic LGBT love story, would they? It presents itself as part of the bury your gays trope, where an LGBT romance always has to have a tragic component. They could have done this story as is, ended it with Joe's death after his confession that he'd been cheating on Chaz because he's dying and wanted to know if he was missing something. But instead, Joe reveals what's actually been going on for the last 9 years, and the ending is one of the most fucking emotionally brutal things they've ever done on this show that just left me feeling kind of sick. I totally get why they did this, of course, because as I said, it's a send-up of a trope. Everyone was expecting to be crying about one thing at the end and calling The Last Weekend a tragic LGBT love story for the ages, when it's actually the story of one of the most brutal acts of revenge that I can think of. And yeah, I get that there would be a lot to criticise The Last Weekend for if it had been a simple Oscar Beatty bury your gays story, but wow, was this hard to watch and really hard to like in the end. Of course that is the point of horror, it's meant to be a violation of you, and this episode was a violation of you. While I may not be able to say I liked The Last Weekend, God did it work. Almost a little too well. Anyway, it still hasn't quite sunk in for me yet that there are only 6 episodes of this show left. Presumably. I mean, given what they did with the bus episode, who knows? Maybe they're not even going to make a 9th season at all. Maybe they're suddenly going to make the show into a 3-hour documentary about ceiling tiles or something. Actually, if it's got Reese and Steve's name on it, part of me wouldn't mind that.